The words fell from Harold Walker's lips with the tender honesty of someone who had spent 6 decades learning what love really means. Steve Harvey stood transfixed at his podium, staring at this 82-year-old man, whose weathered hands held those of his 80-year-old wife, Dorothy, their fingers intertwined with the natural ease of people who had been holding each other through life's storms for 60 years. "I fall in love with her again every single day," Harold had said, his voice still strong despite his age, his eyes never leaving Dorothy's face as he spoke. 60 years we've been married, and I still get butterflies when she walks into the room. Still can't believe she chose me." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable pause between game show questions. It was the reverent quiet that settles when everyone in a room suddenly understands they're witnessing something sacred, something that transcends entertainment and touches the very essence of what it means to love someone for a lifetime. Steve looked at Harold and Dorothy Walker, sitting in the front row, holding hands like teenagers, and saw something that broke every rule of game show hosting. This wasn't about Family Feud anymore. This was about a love story that had endured everything life could throw at it, about commitment that had deepened rather than diminished with time, about two people who had chosen each other not just once, but every single day for 6 decades. Let me take you back to how we arrived at this moment. How what started as a routine Family Feud taping became a masterclass in enduring love, lifelong commitment, and what it means to build a forever that actually lasts forever. It was a golden October afternoon at the Steve Harvey Studios in Atlanta, the kind of autumn day that makes everything feel possible and romantic. But sitting in the front row was a couple whose presence represented something much more profound than seasonal beauty. They embodied love in its most authentic, enduring form. Harold Walker, 82 years old, with silver hair and eyes that still sparkled when he looked at his wife, sat beside Dorothy Walker, 80 years old, with gentle wrinkles that mapped a lifetime of smiles and tears shared with the man beside her. They had been married for exactly 60 years and 2 days, having celebrated their diamond anniversary just this past weekend with a small family gathering. The Walkers weren't typical game show contestants. They had been nominated by their church congregation in Savannah, Georgia, not because they needed money or recognition, but because their love story had become legendary in their community. For 60 years, Harold and Dorothy had been the couple that everyone pointed to when they wanted to believe that forever was possible. Their love story had begun in 1963, when Harold, then 22 and fresh out of college, had taken a job as a bank teller in Savannah. Dorothy, 20, and working as a secretary at the same bank, had caught his attention not just because of her beauty, but because of the way she treated everyone with kindness and respect. Harold always said he knew she was the one when he saw her give up her lunch to help an elderly customer who was confused about his account. Their courtship had been traditional, proper, filled with long walks, shared ice cream sodas, and conversations that lasted until Dorothy's father turned the porch light on to signal it was time for Harold to head home. They had married on October 15, 1963, in a small ceremony at Dorothy's family church, with Harold wearing a borrowed suit and Dorothy in her grandmother's wedding dress. The early years hadn't been easy. Harold's salary at the bank was modest, and they'd lived in a tiny apartment above the hardware store, saving every penny for their first house. Dorothy had worked part-time at the local school, while Harold studied for his banking exams. They'd shared dreams of children, a house with a garden, and growing old together on the front porch swing. Over the decades, they'd weathered everything together. The loss of their first pregnancy, the joy of finally welcoming their son Michael, the heartbreak when Dorothy's mother died young, the anxiety when Harold had his heart attack at 45, the pride when Michael graduated from law school, the bittersweet joy of becoming grandparents, and the deep sorrow when they lost Michael in a car accident 15 years ago. Through it all, they had held hands, literally and figuratively. Harold still opened car doors for Dorothy. Dorothy still made Harold's favorite apple pie every Sunday. They still said, "I love you," every morning and every night. They still held hands when they walked, still sat close enough to touch during church services, still chose each other every single day. The Family Feud opportunity had come as a surprise. Their granddaughter Emily, Michael's daughter, had nominated them for a special episode celebrating long marriages. Harold and Dorothy had been hesitant. They weren't comfortable with public attention, but Emily had convinced them that their love story needed to be shared, especially in a world where commitment seemed increasingly rare. During the pre-show meet and greet, when Steve approached the Walker couple, he immediately noticed something special about them. While other families seemed excited about the television aspect, Harold and Dorothy were focused entirely on each other, sharing quiet conversations and gentle touches that spoke of a connection deeper than anything cameras could capture. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," Steve had said, immediately struck by the way they turned toward him together, as if they operated as a single unit. "How long have you two been married?" 60 years and 2 days, Harold had replied with the precision of someone who counted their blessings daily. "Best 60 years of my life." Dorothy had smiled and squeezed Harold's hand. "He says that, but I'm the lucky one. This man has loved me through thick and thin, through young and old, through good times and hard times." Steve had felt something stir in his chest. A recognition that he was in the presence of something increasingly rare. A love that had not just survived, but thrived across 6 decades. The Walker family had been selected to compete against the Peterson family from North Carolina, with Harold and Dorothy joined by their granddaughter Emily and her husband Mark, along with Dorothy's sister Ruth. From the moment the game started, it was clear that this was about more than typical Family Feud competition. Harold and Dorothy played with a teamwork that spoke of decades of partnership. They conferred quietly before answers, supported each other through difficult questions, and celebrated every success as a shared victory. Steve was charmed by their obvious affection and the way they seemed to communicate without words. The game progressed through 4 rounds, with both families playing well. Steve was in his element, but he found himself repeatedly drawn to Harold and Dorothy, fascinated by their obvious devotion and the way they seemed to exist in their own romantic bubble, even in the midst of a loud, energetic game show. It was during the 5th round that everything changed. The survey question seemed perfect for the occasion. Name something that gets better with age. Dorothy had just given a beautiful answer: marriage. As the family celebrated the points earned, Steve decided to explore this theme further. "That's a wonderful answer, Dorothy," Steve said. 60 years of marriage. You two are like relationship royalty. Harold, what's your secret? How do you stay in love for 60 years? The question was meant to be celebratory, the kind of interaction that honored long marriage and made viewers feel good about love and commitment. But when Harold looked at Dorothy, then back at Steve, his response went far deeper than anyone expected. "Mr. Harvey," Harold said, his voice carrying the wisdom of 8 decades of life, "people always ask me that question, like there's some secret formula, but the truth is, there's no secret. There's just choice." The studio began to quiet as people sensed that something profound was being shared. "Every single day for 60 years, I've woken up and chosen Dorothy," Harold continued, his hand never leaving his wife's. "Not just on the good days, when she looked beautiful and everything was perfect, but on the hard days too, when she was sick, when I was worried about money, when we lost our son, when we didn't know how we'd make it through." Steve felt something shift in the atmosphere, a recognition that this wasn't just game show conversation, but genuine wisdom being shared. "And Dorothy?" Harold said, turning to look at his wife with eyes that held 6 decades of adoration. "She's chosen me right back, every single day. Even when I was stubborn, even when I made mistakes, even when I wasn't the husband she deserved." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Harold, you've always been exactly the husband I needed." Harold shook his head gently. "No, sweetheart, I've been the husband you helped me become. You see, Mr. Harvey, love isn't just a feeling. Feelings come and go. Love is a decision. And Dorothy and I, we've been deciding to love each other for 60 years. The audience was completely silent now, drawn into this intimate conversation between 2 people who had mastered something that seemed increasingly elusive in modern society. "People think marriage gets old," Harold continued, "but Dorothy gets more beautiful to me every day. Not because she looks the same as when she was 20. We've both got wrinkles and gray hair and aching joints. But because every day I know her better, appreciate her more, fall deeper in love with who she is." Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who had heard every kind of story the human heart could tell, found himself witnessing something that transcended entertainment. This was love in its purest form, commitment that had been tested by time and emerged stronger. "Harold," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "what you just described, that's not just marriage advice, that's life advice. That's proof that real love exists." He looked at Dorothy. "And Dorothy, how does it feel to be loved like that? For 60 years?" Dorothy smiled, her voice still sweet despite her age. "It feels like home, Mr. Harvey. It feels like safety and adventure all at once. Harold has been my best friend, my partner, my comfort, and my excitement, all rolled into one person for 60 years." She squeezed Harold's hand. "And the beautiful thing is, I fall in love with him again every day too. He still makes me laugh. He still surprises me. He still treats me like I'm the most precious thing in his world." Steve felt his own eyes filling with tears. "You know what? I think we need to do something special here. This isn't just about Family Feud anymore. This is about celebrating something that deserves to be celebrated." He set down his cards and addressed the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, Harold and Dorothy Walker have just given us a masterclass in love. 60 years of marriage in a world where people give up after 60 days. They've shown us what commitment looks like, what choosing love every day means." Steve turned back to the couple. "Harold, Dorothy, would you do me the honor of renewing your wedding vows right here, right now, in front of all these people who have been moved by your love story?" The audience erupted in applause, but Harold and Dorothy only had eyes for each other. Harold's face lit up like he was 22 years old again, and Dorothy's smile was radiant. "Sweetheart," Harold said to Dorothy, "would you marry me again?" "Every day for the rest of my life," Dorothy replied without hesitation. What followed was unlike anything in Family Feud history. Steve, drawing on his experience officiating weddings, led Harold and Dorothy through an impromptu vow renewal ceremony. Harold, his voice strong despite his age, promised to love Dorothy for whatever years they had left. Dorothy, tears streaming down her cheeks, promised to continue choosing Harold every day until her last breath. When Steve pronounced them still husband and wife, the audience rose to their feet in the longest standing ovation in the show's history. But Harold and Dorothy only noticed each other, sharing a kiss that carried 60 years of love and the promise of whatever forever they had left. The episode that aired 4 weeks later became the most watched Family Feud episode in history, not because of the game, but because viewers witnessed something increasingly rare. Proof that lifelong love is possible, that commitment can deepen rather than diminish over time, that choosing someone every day for 60 years can create something beautiful beyond imagination. But the real impact happened in the weeks and months that followed. The Walkers received thousands of letters from couples inspired by their story. Marriage counselors reported increases in couples wanting to work on their relationships rather than end them. Wedding planners noted more couples asking for traditional vows and conversations about lifelong commitment. Steve established the Harold and Dorothy Walker Love Legacy Foundation, providing marriage counseling and relationship education for couples at all stages of their relationships. The foundation's motto, taken from Harold's words, reads simply, "Love is a choice. Choose well. Choose daily." 6 months after the taping, Harold suffered a stroke. For 3 weeks, Dorothy never left his hospital bedside, holding his hand and talking to him even when doctors weren't sure he could hear. When Harold finally opened his eyes, his first word was Dorothy, and hers was forever. Harold recovered, though he moved more slowly and tired more easily. But his love for Dorothy never wavered. If anything, the health scare reminded them both that their time was precious, that every day together was a gift to be treasured. On their 61st anniversary, Harold and Dorothy returned to the Family Feud studio for a special update episode. Steve asked Harold if he still fell in love with Dorothy every day. "More than ever," Harold replied, his hand finding Dorothy's as naturally as breathing. "Every wrinkle tells a story we've shared. Every gray hair marks a year we've had together. Every day we have left is a day I get to love the most wonderful woman who ever lived." Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every relationship conversation, every piece of advice he gives about love and marriage. He learned that real love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about choosing to love imperfect people perfectly, day after day, year after year, until choosing love becomes as natural as breathing. Harold and Dorothy Walker's love story became more than just a television moment. It became proof that in a world of disposable relationships and easy divorces, lifelong love is still possible. It became a reminder that the best love stories aren't about passion alone, but about the daily choice to keep loving when passion evolves into something deeper, steadier, more beautiful. Because sometimes an 82-year-old man's simple truth about falling in love every day can teach an entire studio about the meaning of commitment. Sometimes a game show can become a sanctuary for celebrating love that lasts. And sometimes the most powerful television happens when two people who have mastered the art of loving prove that forever isn't just a promise, it's a daily practice. Harold and Dorothy Walker showed the world that 60 years of marriage isn't about staying together despite the changes that come with time. It's about falling in love with every version of the person you chose, celebrating the ways love deepens and matures, and understanding that the greatest romance is the one that grows stronger with each passing year. Today, Harold and Dorothy Walker continue to choose each other every day. They still hold hands when they walk. They still say, "I love you," every morning and every night. And they still serve as proof that when two people decide to love each other for a lifetime, they create something that time cannot diminish, something that grows more beautiful with each passing year, something that reminds the world that true love stories don't end. They just keep getting better.